All right. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started here with this class on transforming conflict into connection. So, as it says, it's all about using the power of the pause to turn arguments into intimacy and to turn conflict into connection. Now, as a love and relationship coach, this is one of those things that seems really simple, but I think as we'll find, it's going to prove to be one of the most potent and powerful tools that those of us that are interested in deepening in our love and intimacy journeys can practice. So, welcome. I'm really glad you're here. Moving forward, a little bit about me. I've been working as a love and relationship coach now for well over a decade. And before that, I was a yoga teacher and also worked in various other healing arts. So, I've really been deeply curious about being a healthy human for a long time, and I've found that working in the realm of love and relationship is one of the most beautiful, but also the most challenging pathways to transformation and awakening and becoming more whole as a human being. So, and as I say here, while the pause may seem simple or obvious, it's one of the tools I most wish I had when I was seeking love and relationship in the past, because I just didn't know it was an option. So let's just look at for what some of us may be a familiar cycle in our lives, which is a cycle of argument or a cycle of conflict that doesn't really ever go anywhere and just kind of goes in circles. I've been there myself, and it can be incredibly frustrating, depressing, and obviously lead to a lack of fulfillment in the relationship. That we get triggered by something that may not even seem like such a big deal in the moment. And then there's an argument that feels all too familiar. And then it leads to distance. Or sometimes it can lead to makeup sex. But either way, it's not really a healthy response to a conflict that doesn't get resolved. And so that's a key piece here around the art of the pause, is that it's about resolving the conflict, not just kind of ending it. Because as we'll get into, unresolved conflict leads to all kinds of issues in a relationship. So today I'm also going to invite us to use the power of perspective. It's a really important tool to not get so caught up in our challenges and our issues that we can't see other pathways and other possibilities for what's happening in our lives and in our relationships. And so by doing that, that's going to enable us to begin to embody more wholeness and begin to choose healthier responses in the moment by having a wider perspective and an ability to pull back from being so locked into something when it's challenging. So as you can see here, these are pretty opposite ways of being in conflict, but I think for me, I can definitely identify with acting like a 6-year-old sometimes when I'm in conflict, to not necessarily totally throw a tantrum, but it's the same kind of energy of just feeling so upset about what's happening that my mature self knows it's out of line, but there's some part of me that takes over. And again, you've probably heard about fight or flight mechanisms in the body, sympathetic system arousal. And it just happens, like that. Like you might be feeling totally fine, like things are okay in your life and with your partner, and then he or she says something or does something, and suddenly you're enraged or despairing or questioning the whole relationship. And it's really astonishing to me as I get older just to notice how fast that happens and what it takes for me. I can only speak for myself to pull back and realize that I'm caught up in a part. And I'll talk a little bit about parts if you're not familiar with that terminology, though I think many of us are these days from Dick Schwartz and IFS. So the other way to be in conflict is actually to stay present and calm and be in your wise adult self, which seems almost impossible for some of us in our own history of our own family systems and things like that. But it is something we can begin to move towards, is stepping between stimulus and reaction and creating a healthy response. So it's my assertion that if we can't be present and patient with ourselves and our partner, that there's really no chance of transforming the conflict into something that resembles connection. So in this slide, I just thought it'd be helpful. It's helpful for me, honestly, and I think it's helpful for most of us to think about, well, how do I know when I'm in my wise adult self? That sounds great, but what does that actually look like? And so Dick Schwartz, the founder of Internal Family Systems, which is a method of working with people for healing in different domains. It's not just for relationships, that's often used in that regard, but it's definitely used for all kinds of challenges that humans face, addictions, other kinds of mental health challenges, physical health challenges. It's a really broad topic, and I highly recommend checking it out if you're not already familiar with IFS, but it can be very helpful. And I'm not certified in it, but I just study it and work with it on my own and with others in a way that feels appropriate for me. So the 8 C's are calmness, clarity, curiosity, compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. And I think it's fair to say that if we were embodying these 8 qualities in every moment, we'd be pretty enlightened beings. I sometimes think of Dick Schwartz's framing of the wise, mature adult self as pretty much like an awake being. You're an awake beingness, at least in that moment when you're experiencing these qualities of consciousness. And I'll just speak for myself. I'm definitely not capable yet as of being in these energies 24/7. But in moments, I do connect with it and I do feel the truth of that. And for me, it really resonates. And there's another slide here with some other energies that I think are also kind of complementary and helpful, which are the 5 Ps, which are presence, which in some ways, to me, it all boils down to presence. It's like that is the ultimate end goal of all of our practice, of all of our journeying for healing and for love and for relationship and for meaning. It all to me comes back to this moment of being present, fully present for our lives. But the other P words here are patience, which another one of my favorite teachers, Richard Rudd of the Gene Keys, has said that the most important quality on the spiritual path is patience. And it's the one that he finds, and I can resonate with this, that most seekers don't always embody because we're just really wanting to get the healing or the awakening or the love or whatever it is. And being able to, again, pause and practice patience really helps to have more presence. And again, perspective again, ability to see things from different angles, to step back. Again, you can see how these things all play into each other, that if we can't pause, it's really hard to be present, it's really hard to be patient, it's really hard to have perspective in the moment. And then playfulness. Again, I this is one that I think many of us, when it comes to our relationship challenges, could use more of because sometimes I know for myself, I can get really serious. And sometimes a little playfulness, a little bit of light jesting, like healthy teasing can be really helpful in relationship. And of course, that has to work for your partner. But it's something just to keep in mind that if there's no playfulness in your interaction with your partner, when you're in conflict, that can be a sign that maybe you do need a pause. If you can't have any lightness and humor, if it feels so heavy, like that's kind of a sign that maybe you're not fully in your whole self. And I think also it's worth noting that I think especially for those of us that are more intellectual, logical, maybe raised in a way that we were very much about getting things right and being serious about things, this can be harder for us. I'll speak for myself to bring playfulness to those moments. I'm like, well, this is serious. But that seriousness can actually get in the way of creating connection and creating wholeness and creating the kind of relationship we want to experience. And the final P word here is persistence, which again, also I think a bit underrated in today's world of instant gratification and swipe culture and just thinking, well, there's so many people out there I could connect with. But really taking seriously that true commitment and healing and growth in relationship takes persistence, and that whoever you've attracted into your life and you've deepened in with, generally speaking, and I'm not the first person to say this, despite feeling like we've done so much work and we're so far on our path and your partner feels really like less evolved or something, I think that's generally not true, and that you're actually like a good match for each other if you've been in something for a while, and to trust in that with persistence to see how you can both evolve and grow. because I think it's a bit of a short-sighted tendency in today's culture to, bolt at the first sign of something feeling off in a relationship. Obviously, there are times for that, but generally speaking, I think we could all do with more persistence when we bring these other qualities as well. And that, in my experience in working with my clients, it brings a lot of transformation. And when we have, again, we don't have patience, then we can't be persistent, and then it's just going to bring those same challenges, same issues to your next relationship. And that's maybe part of the path for some people. I had to do that myself, is just to get, after 3 or 4 relationships that went south in spectacular fashion. Nothing wrong with relationships ending, but I think when they end in a really dysfunctional and dramatic and traumatic way, I think that's a sign that you weren't able to bring your whole self to the relationship, because then when the relationship transitions, you can do so with love. And I think, as some of you know, I'm started off as a conscious uncoupling coach, which was helping people transition out of relationships with more care, usually after they ended pretty badly. But I think one sign of a healthy relationship is not whether you stay together or not. It's how it actually feels to be in the relationship, and if it does transition to something other than partnership, that's done with love and care, and that's actually a sign of a pretty mature relationship, in my opinion. Okay, so the moment to moment practice of awareness, this is something for right now. I've shared these concepts, the 8 C's, the 5 P's, and that can seem like, okay, I need to bring that to my relationship next time we're feeling like we're getting close to conflict. I'm going to bring the calm and the courage and the curiosity and the playfulness and the patience and all that. But the reality is we need to practice these things moment to moment, day in, day out. It's kind of like a consciousness gym to seek to be in your whole self, especially as we get aware that we've had some relational traumas and wounds in our lifetime, that this becomes our work. And it's beautiful work. It's like a privilege to work on these things in this lifetime, so that you can bring that to your life, to your partner, to your kids, to your family. So there's never not a time to be practicing connecting to self energy, as Dick Schwartz calls it, the big S self. I sometimes call it the wise adult self or nurturing adult self. You can come up with your own name for it. Like, what qualities do you want to embody moment to moment? And that's true right here, right now on this online class. How present can you be? How curious? How calm? And if you get triggered by something, I say, awesome, have the perspective to notice that. So again, the more we can notice when we're in a part versus our whole self, the more we'll be able to utilize that awareness in our relationships. And when we're in conflict, that's the key time. And so I'll get more into that. So one thing I want to caveat here is that if things are feeling crunchy in your life, and your relationship is crunchy, it's not always about your partner or your relationship, or even how you show up in the relationship. There's a lot of other factors that I think could be levers that you could pull in your life that might impact the relationship and your life in a deeper way. So one aspect is physiological factors, like if you're not sleeping well, if you're not moving, if you're not drinking enough water or not drinking clean water, poor nutrition, other health issues, that's going to make it harder to show up and be in your whole self. If you're shallow breathing, if you're underslept, it makes it very, very difficult to show up well in your life, let alone in your relationship, let alone when things get stressful in your relationship. So these are all things to track in other ways and make sure that you're not over-indexing on the conflict in your relationship, and also really looking at other areas of life. Another one that's really huge, that is a big issue, I think, in today's world, is a sense of meaning and purpose, and connection to maybe a higher power. That lack of day-to-day fulfillment and purpose and connection to something that gives meaning to life can obviously put a strain on us. And sometimes we'll seek to create that meaning and purpose in our relationship. And I would suggest that that's not an ideal strategy, that will put a lot of pressure on the relationship to be something for you, or for you to be something for your partner, that is unsustainable. Even if they are the center of your universe in some way, we still need something that we're bringing to the relationship that is coming from beyond this other person, and to see them as a reflection of our own divinity and a fractal of the wholeness that we already are too. So in that sense, we can create a healthier relationship instead of trying to get something from the other person. And finally, this is not an exhaustive list at all, but just external quote unquote stressors like things at work, things happening in society, politically, geographically, ecologically, all these things can stress us out. Money, our family stuff with our blood family or your partner's family, these can challenge us, right? So just tracking all that is important before you get into it's all about solving conflict with my partner. Because if you don't deal with those things, you may be better at dealing with conflict with your partner, but you're still not going to be as fulfilled in your relationship as you might want because it's not about the relationship. So I'm going to talk about the pause and let's figure out this technology of the pause. But I think I shouldn't say more important, but it's really important to get what the cost of not pausing is. I think this is something, again, I had to learn for myself in really painful ways that I just thought, well, let's just keep processing. Let's just keep talking. Let's just keep working something out. Let's keep just being in conflict without really being able to pause and track myself or my partner to track herself and to be able to speak in ways that would generate different outcomes. Because basically, if you don't learn how to resolve conflict that creates harm, pretty soon after it happens, it's going to lead to a degradation in the relationship and almost certainly create a really unhealthy dynamic between the two people. And again, the relationship is most likely to end kind of in a bitter and really painful way. Because again, I'm not saying relationships ending is inherently bad, but I'm saying when they end with a lot of trauma and drama and harm to the people and to the kids and to the family systems and to the community, that's something I think we want to stop, happening in our world and in our lives and to stop normalizing that. So I just really want to take a moment to get like this really matters to learn how to pause and learn how to only cultivate connections with people that you can feel trusting that you can transform the patterns of conflict with and not continue to perpetuate unhealthy conflict in your life as if it's like this is just how it is. Like it's not just how it is, and it is a learnable skill. I've had to learn it, and I'm still learning it, and I'm so grateful that I have a partner that dances with that in with me. So just to speak a bit about some research here and also just some practical things to check in with yourself. Like, do I do these things? Again, noticing if you feel anything like that comes up around it. I know I've done pretty much all of these things in my relational history, some of them embarrassingly recently. But the Gottmans have been researching tens of thousands of couples for decades now, and they can say with it's astonishing with over 90% accuracy that relationships will fail. And again, fail in a bad way, not just, oh, we're choosing to separate because we've grown apart. It's more just like bad divorces and separations that are just toxic. And so these are the four horsemen of relational apocalypse, things that like you let these things in to your relationship, they're toxic. And toxic means even like a couple of drops causes illness. So sometimes I used to think, well, these things are happening when I was much younger and I was in relationships. So there's like a lot of passion, a lot of love, but there will also be some of these behaviors. And I w wouldn't get just how harmful that was, whether it was the other person doing it or me. I just thought, oh, we'll just get over that. And not resolving that conflict just caused harm down the line. So criticism, again, this is the number one thing to not do when you're fighting, by the way. I mean, they're all number one things, but kind of like attacking the other person's character instead of talking about what they did. And this is also something to note for ourselves too. Like this is when you're in a part for yourself. If you attack yourself, like that's also unhealthy, right? Instead of saying, oh, that wasn't the wisest choice I just made, instead of, oh, I'm a stupid idiot, right? So we sometimes project that out into our partner. So generally, if we're doing that to our partner, we're also doing it to ourselves. I'd say you should know these things and be like on the lookout for them in case they arise. You can say, hey, that felt like criticism. And then the other person should say, oh, wow, you're right. I take that back. I'm really sorry. Right. Instead of doubling down on it. So contempt, also really painful thing, right? Just kind of like expressing disgust or mocking your partner. That's one I've honestly had to work on is mockery, because it's so tempting to mock your partner when they're acting a certain way and you want to show them how bad they're acting. But it's one of those things, just don't do it, like just that's the time to pause when you feel like you're going to mock your partner in that way. Defensiveness, again, these are things that are really hard to not do. I just want to name that, like, because we're not always in the whole self, right? So when someone shares something to us that we feel is unfair or unwelcome, we'll just shirk responsibility or counter complain and say, like, well, you're the problem, it's not me. Instead of just listening and be like, okay, wow, I hear that that's your story. And again, later on we'll learn how to share in ways that make it easier for the other person to hear. So that's also like, partnership is obviously a team game, and you want your partner to be playing the game with a certain set of rules that you also play by, and then it just makes everything spiral up. And again, as I say, if you're on the same page with like these well-researched protocols to things to do and things to not do, it can really be helpful. And so as a love and relationship coach, like in my own relationship, it's definitely a little bit awkward sometimes because I'm just a human being that sometimes is triggered. And so I need to honor these things as well. Just because I study and teach and coach this stuff, I also occasionally need to remember these things for myself. So, and stonewalling finally is when you shut down, tune out, or physically leave. And again, when we talk about the pause, leaving is appropriate during the pause, but you leave in a certain way that is agreed upon. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But stonewalling is really more like a punitive thing. Even if you don't realize it at the time, it's very harmful to your partner when you shut down. All right. So another relationship expert coach that I really like is Terry Real. And he has these losing strategies, which are kind of similar to, let's see, slide a little bigger, kind of similar but different to the Four Horsemen, but just I think they're worth noting because, again, I've done all of these things and I've had all these things kind of done to me, quote unquote. And I think it's just important, again, to, as much as we want to be focused on what we do want in life and orient our hearts and our minds towards the future we're creating, it's good to have the awareness of the losing strategies, the things to notice, like, oh, am I doing this? Is my partner doing this? And what's motivating that? And again, that's where some therapy or coaching or journaling or some other stuff might be necessary, but it's it's something to note that we have impulses towards this. And also to note, if I do this, if you do this, like, it is sadly, on some level, it's very common. That's why there's people who write books about this stuff and teach about it, because a lot of people in relationship do these things. And again, I think for me and other people that are in this field, I imagine we're all seeking to stop normalizing these behaviors and teach people to stop tolerating them, so that people that do these things will ultimately find they need to do their healing work either in relationship or on their own before they can actually be in a healthy relationship or in any kind of relationship. So the first one's needing to be right. Again, I am so, this is one that I definitely get into, and I love being right. I think everyone loves being right, but it is a total killer of intimacy and connection and relationship. And Terry Real says, and you've probably heard this expression, you can either be right or be in connection. And he says something like, I think I have a quote about it later. He says, you can either be right or stay married. Controlling your partner, either by bullying or manipulation. Again, this is one that can be really subtle, how different masculine or feminine energies might do bullying or manipulation, and just to notice that. And again, to have your partner's buy-in to lovingly call it out if you notice that, if you feel like you're being manipulated or bullied, and to kind of have a zero tolerance policy on it, because even little drops of these things are toxic and need to be purified from your relational field. And again, this takes time and persistence, and you don't need to like freak out about it if it happens, but just be like, okay, let's look at this and transform it and get the help we need if we need help. This third one I think is really important, especially in a culture that really values self-expression, and there's everyone posting online about stuff, sharing their deepest thoughts and sharing about their intimate experiences and things like that. And like there's a bit of an indexing towards self-expression being good. But when it comes to healthy partnership, it's really important to not use self-expression as a weapon. And there's a real gift in restraint. The need to vent or to kind of like, as Terry Real calls it, the barf bag approach to intimacy is like, I'm just going to tell you everything I feel all at once. And it's just like overwhelming and kind of icky. It doesn't create what we want, right? It's like a very childish strategy. And again, I'm not saying I haven't felt like I've wanted to do this as well, but this is again a place where journaling, therapy, having other places to express yourself artistically can be helpful. There's things like sacred theater and shadow work that can really help with this. It's not that the desire to express itself is bad. It's just don't don't impose that on your partner, right? So if you feel that urge, that's something to tune in with yourself about and seek other outlets for creatively, because it's definitely, we need to express ourselves in life, but that can happen in a lot of other ways, right? So bring your partner like the best of you as much as you can, and that can include your vulnerable parts, but not this need to just spew and vent. Retaliation, again, obviously there's something in that is inherently human. I would say when we're hurt, sometimes we want to hurt others, and that's like the classic line that, hurt people, right? And so this is that's retaliation, right? Whether it's hurting your partner because they hurt you, or just hurting someone else because your partner hurt you, or hurting someone else because your one of your parents hurt you, right? So stopping this is also stopping like cycles of trauma that are pretty ancient. And again, not easy, but noticing that, and that's again, I think we'll get into some of the strategies that are the winning strategies, but using vulnerability and presence with what is at a deeper level is what solves, for that urge to retaliate. It's actually getting the deeper need met of managing your hurt. And the last one is withdrawal, which again is kind of like stonewalling. It's disengaging subtly from the relationship, staying away more physically, or just less intimacy, less lovemaking. Again, it can be a way to punish. It can also be a way to just not deal with the other person's needs, like for fear of conflict. And again, it's like a unilateral thing, and it's just going to create a death spiral for the relationship. All right, so we're about halfway through here, so let's pause, take a breath. I know when I talk about all these kind of dark, toxic energies that live, in my system to some extent today, and that I seek to transform and not express in my life or in my relationship, there's some shame and embarrassment sometimes to think about the times I have been retaliatory, to think about the times I have stonewalled, or the times that I have been contemptuous of my partner or of anybody. And just to get, that's part of the human journey today, is there's a lot of humans that are struggling to become more whole and to not act from these younger parts. And thank God we have a lot of tools and resources and teachers, and we're all in it together. We're all walking each other home, as Ram Dass said. And that again comes back to the patience and persistence. It's not about tolerating bad behaviors from yourself or others, but it's also not about, having like such a high standard that you cut people out of your life, or you get so down on yourself because you indulge these things for a moment, but it's really like, can we catch ourselves more quickly? So on a mindset level, right? So this is a perspective thing that really creates a big shift that again, I really took me a long time to get this, and I'm still getting it, is to be in a us mindset versus a you versus me mindset. Like I thought either in relationship, like I'm almost like totally merged with my partner and everything is so lovey-dovey and amazing, or we're in the conflict is you versus me, and the thing is we need to get back to this place of more like perfect merged energy or something, versus we're two unique individuals that do create an us, but we have our challenges. We have these patterns that we need to learn to solve. And part of that is being teammates in that exploration, like looking at the problem together and being like, okay, you and me, we're side by side, we're looking at this problem here. How can we work together to solve it? And sometimes that may require an outside party for more perspective, but just being committed to that versus one of us has to be right, one of us has to be wrong, one of us has to win, one of us has to lose. Because again, that is just going to create a toxic residue over time in the relationship if that's how people are operating, you know? And so again, it's about connection versus being right. And it's about this shift in mindset that like if conflict arises, you can take a breath and be like, okay, wow, there's conflict here. Okay, are we going to be teammates now to kind of like look at this conflict together and how we can kind of dance with it in a more healthy way versus this conflict is creating opposition because it never really needs to. And one thing I wanted to share on conflict is that the Gottmans have so much research and it's just worth, even though I don't feel like they're like about spiritual evolutionary partnership to some degree in the ways that I am, but they have like the foundational stuff really down, which I think is important to have the deeper spiritual evolutionary partnership. And that is that in the couples they study, about 60 to 70% of the conflict is kind of perpetual. It's not really solvable. It has to do with differences in how the people are, that they have different values, different needs, different ways of being in the world that are just going to create ongoing conflict. And so this idea that I'm unique or you're unique in our partnership, we're going to have like zero conflict and solve it by just working through it once is, I think, perhaps not a healthy attitude or a healthy goal. It's more to be like, oh, okay, we can understand these conflicts and see that they're going to keep arising, but A, not be surprised by them or think they're a problem, and B, work together to kind of refine how we deal with them over time so that it becomes, again, an opportunity for more closeness, more growth, and evolving the relationship. So another Gottman ratio you've probably heard about, magic ratio, is the 5 to 1. And one thing I have to say, I originally thought the 5 to 1 was, generally speaking, that like just over the course of a year, you want to have a 5 to 1 ratio of positive to negative interactions. But actually, the the research is about in conflict. When you're actually in conflict, you need to have a 5 to 1 positive to negative ratio. So again, just something to think about. Like that's why I think pausing is such an important tool because at least speaking for myself, when I've gotten into conflict, it's definitely not been a 5 to 1 positive to negative interaction. It's probably been more negative than positive. So that's why those are toxic conflicts. They're inherently not going to strengthen the relationship. So you really want to get to like if you're in conflict, it's actually about being in conflict in a way where you're really able to bring goodness to it. You're really listening to each other, you're acknowledging each other, you're in conflict in a way that actually feels kind of good versus conflict that feels hostile, which I think is when it's more negative than positive. And again, outside of conflict, this is again something to track is like they say a 20 to 1 ratio is indicative of couples that are happy and last, for the long term. And if you have less than that, it makes it more difficult. So I don't know if that sounds like a high bar to you, but it is something to track, and just be like, how am I creating positive interactions with my partner? Like taking responsibility for that. And again, these are shared understandings you want to have with your partner. Some people may naturally just be able to do this, but for those of us that have struggled in relationship, we need to be proactive to generate positive interactions and respond to bids for connection. And that's a whole other topic I won't get into here. But again, Gottman's work's really the John and Julie Gottman, they're really worth checking out for just these baseline data-driven things that are not woo-woo, but are just like understanding them is super helpful about what helps relationships be solid and what doesn't. One other thing that's really, a powerful thing to think about is that in their research, they can look at the first 3 minutes of a fight and not only know what's going to happen in the fight, but whether or not the relationship will survive. That just 3 minutes, 180 seconds, that if they're not in that 5 to 1 ratio, and the conflict is more hostile, that is indicative 90% of the time that the couple won't, make it in terms of staying together. This is something to really consider. It's a thing to really take to heart when you're in conflict to be like, okay, how can I create some positive interactions in this conflict? Like that really matters, you know? All right. Now, I did want to take just a moment to share about the deeper roots or sources of conflict because on some level, as I was putting this together, I'm like, well, why do we get into relationships with people? And there's love at the beginning, people get married, they have kids, and that becomes really toxic. I'm sure we all have stories of people we know or we ourselves have gone through breakups or divorces between two people that used to love each other, that, shared the same bed for decades, that have kids together, that were so incredibly toxic and where they literally went to war with each other. And it's like, what, WTF? Like, why are we doing this, humans? Like, why? And so this is a bigger question than I can really, tackle in this webinar. And it's obviously, even if I had the rest of my life, it's just such a big question about the the trauma and the wounding that comes as being a human in this day and age, and maybe in previous times too, but all we can speak to is that this is what's very prevalent today. And so I just have a few on this slide, like a few deeper issues that we need to look at in ourselves and in the world if we're going to transform these patterns in relationship and to not make it something unique to us or unique to our partner. So one of them is past relational wounds, obviously. Like if you had something happen in a past relationship, like someone cheated on you and then you're in a new relationship, you might be more vigilant around that. It might take some healing. Childhood wounds, of course, there's just hundreds of books written about attachment theory. I'll speak a little bit about attachment and anxious and avoidant attachment stuff as well, but there's also just the other traumas of childhood that are more specific and more difficult to uncover sometimes. Then there's ancestral issues, and also that can also include things in the genetic lineage. We can even talk about soul lineage stuff and epigenetic stuff from your parents, your grandparents, other ancestral energies that you're running. And then there's just cultural, societal pressures and that are we are feel those all in our bodies. That's all in our DNA. It's all in the energy of being alive today. And then of course there's just so many other factors of what's kind of putting pressure on us in our lives. So again, it's not all about like, well, I just got to pause and learn how to talk to my partner and everything's going to get better. But one of the things that I believe that even though I'm a big fan of therapy and healing and all kinds of other practices, that when we're in relationship with another human and they're also a willing participant, and honestly, even if they're not, I'll talk a little bit about that, but obviously it's helpful if they are on the same page with us, that we can use the conflict that arises in our lives with our partners as this microcosm of the larger healing journey we're on, because it's everything isn't everything, in my opinion. So it may not have to do specifically with your partner or with, what's really up in your relationship. You could be healing something from your childhood, very likely, with your partner, but you could also be healing some ancestral stuff with your partner or some societal cultural stuff. Like you don't know. They're just like a provocateur, or as Dick Schwartz says, he calls them your Tor mentors, like TOR dash mentor. So your partner triggers you, annoys you, but it's like they're mentoring you to find something that needs healing within you. And so we can be grateful for them in that way. And again, it's about going slow, and that's why the pause is helpful. So, all right, the pause, yay, master skill. Again, as I was creating this, I was like, this seems so obvious and simple and everyone knows it, but yet the fact is it's might be common sense, but it's not common practice, and I think that's why I wanted to share about this, because I think it would be beautiful and powerful and helpful if more and more people, especially those that have had some issues with relationship in their lives, with love relationship, knew about the healthiness of pausing and that they shared that with their partners or their partners already knew it. And it was just like more of a norm. So we can support each other to pause. And then this could also work outside of love relationships. It could work in the workplace. It could, obviously, we need that in the political arena. People just like taking a moment to not get all triggered and into fight or flight and into reactivity, and also, of course, online. So I think more pausing creates a better world, and so here it's again, it's really simple. Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning talked about this basic principle of in between stimulus and response, there's a space for something to happen. And that space is the pause. And the fact that he even called it a response and not a reaction means that he always felt that there was an opportunity to not react. But he was obviously a very awake person on a certain level to be able to bring that level of presence to the very, very profoundly, you know, difficult situations he found himself in. But we can do the same thing, in our lives and in our relationships, is to really, embrace the pause in our lives and be like, the pause is an awesome practice, and to not feel like it's some kind of remedial thing. It's actually very advanced, I'd like to say. So how do we create a pause protocol with our, I'm just going to say, for the sake of argument here, with our partners, is first step is to establish it, right? Not every couple has this kind of built in. So it's something you want to say, have a conversation about with your partner to say, hey, I'd like for us to create a pause protocol so that in the future, if and when we get triggered in conflict, we can ask for a pause and we know that we have an agreement to do so. And so I would say even writing it down, so it's like really clear and be like, yes, this is something we're going to do. And again, it's important to frame it if you're bringing it to a partner that's never done anything like this and has no idea about pausing being a good thing, to say, I want to create this because I really care about you. I care about us. And by doing this, we're going to be able to bring more care to each other and more connection and create a healthier relationship. So hopefully you want to like sell them on the idea of needing pauses. And again, every relationship expert I've ever studied says that a pause protocol is really important to have for couples. So again, this is not some thing I've just created out of thin air. It's like a really important practice that most people just never learn about until they go to couples therapy or start reading books about relationship from these people, you know. So okay, so time limits. This is one where I don't want to be too dogmatic, but I'm just going to share what the Gottmans say, which is if you're really flooded, which means your heart rate's gotten super elevated, like you're in full kind of sympathetic arousal. The Gottmans say you need about 20 minutes to let your physiological system calm down, to let the cortisol that's flooded your system kind of be reabsorbed. And that makes sense to me. I think again that really depends on the level of trigger and arousal. And I would say it also depends on your level of practice, right? So some people, if you have a daily meditation practice, let's say, and you also do some conscious breathing daily, it's like athletes, right? So athletes can get super intensely, activated by doing an activity. Like biathletes are a great example. This is kind of random, but like they like cross country ski and then they have to shoot at a target, right? So they have to calm themselves really quickly. Again, they're super human in that regard, but if you're really good at doing breath work and doing like box breathing or coherence breathing or something, maybe you only need 10 minutes, but again, don't rush the process. The other thing is 24-hour time limit. Again, this is not like a hard and fast rule, but more than that can start to be challenging, especially for the partner that might be more anxious, which I'll talk about again in a minute. But to not also, it's also important for the person that may need more time to regulate themselves to not feel rushed by their partner that's more anxious. So again, this is why these things, you want to be a team and get like, generally speaking, one partner is going to want things to resolve faster than the other. That's totally normal. That's natural. It's part of what drew you together, is the differences that you embody. One partner is going to be a little bit more anxious under pressure, and one partner is going to be a little bit more avoidant under pressure. That doesn't mean that's your definition of who you are. I mean, it could be, but it also might just be under pressure. We all tend to be more anxious or more avoidant. It's just you have to choose a side when the pressure hits you. You want to self-regulate or you want to co-regulate, right? So again, we don't need to pathologize that, but in terms of the time limits, that's something you want to talk about with your partner, knowing them, knowing yourself. And again, if you know you're more the anxious partner, you can just say like, okay, 24-hour maximum, but I'd really appreciate it if you could come back as soon as possible within like, half an hour or an hour generally, except unless it's just like you're just completely frazzled and you just realize you can't. Practice proactively. I'll confess, I shouldn't say I've made this up, but this is what I recommend to the people I work with, because I feel like if you wait until you're in a flooded, super extreme conflict to practice this pause, you're not going to trust it as much. So I feel like it's sort of like, again, bringing the athlete's metaphor back. Like athletes do a lot of practice of things so that when the pressure is on, they can perform. So I'd say similarly here, practice when you just like feel like your partner did something annoying. You're like, hey, can we just practice like a 5 minute pause? Because I feel a little triggered. You're not flooded. You're not freaking out. You're just like, that was annoying. But you don't want to say immediately, I'm annoyed with you. You want to say, like, what's the deeper thing here? So that's the time to, think about the 8 C words from Dick Schwartz and the 5 P words and be like, okay, can I embody wholeness? And we'll talk a bit about how to then come back to your partner with care and then share from a place that's more helpful, right? Like instead of a losing strategy, a winning strategy to come back to connect. All right, let's keep moving forward here. Do's and don'ts of pausing. I'm going to go through these a little quickly because I realize I'm running a little late here. So don't use it as a weapon. Obviously, it should not be like a way to stonewall or get away. Do it from your own need. This is actually really important, so I should highlight this. Even if you feel like your partner's the super triggered one, and I've been guilty of this myself, I'm like, you're really triggered. We need to pause. And then they, of course, are going to push back on that. They're going to be like, F you, you're the one with the problem. And then you're just continuing to be in conflict. So I would say don't do that. Just say, wow, I really feel like I need a moment to pause. Can we have a reset? I could use 5 minutes. Like again, you can do it with these shorter pauses. I think is a helpful thing to practice day in, day out. If you've been in conflict on and off with your partner for a while, it's good to start doing these practices. During the time of the pause, again, self-inquiry, don't stew about your partner. Like think about all the ways they did things wrong and kind of create the court case against them and how you're going to prosecute them when you get back. Like, again, these are habits of mind we need to transform. Instead, tune in with yourself, your core needs, what you felt, what story you made up, and then so you can come back and share that with them in as loving and caring a way as you can. Again, your teammates, right? And so when you return, listen reciprocally. Don't come back just hoping to be listened to, but not give them the same gift of presence and understanding. All right, so this is what I spoke about before, navigating anxious and avoidant styles of attachment. So, I can just speak for myself. I tend to be more avoidant in conflict. I'm like, I need space. You're freaking me out. But for the avoidant partner, starting on the right side here, it's really, really important for you if you're the avoidant one and your partner's the more anxious, that you say, hey, I need a pause and some time for myself, but I care about you. I care about dealing with this, and I'll be back at whatever, half an hour from now. An hour from now, I'm just gonna go take a walk. I'm gonna listen to some music. I think it could be fun if you had like playlists that each of you has that are good for you, like 5 minute one, 10 minute ones, half an hour ones, or like songs that have you feel good and reminded of something good about yourself or the relationship. So yeah, so just make sure you do that, avoidant partners. Make sure you reassure them you're coming back, you're not abandoning them, because again, anxious partners fear abandonment and that can get them really dysregulated. So the pause can be painful for them if you don't do that well. Anxious partners, again, their work, your work, my work, is to cultivate the ability to self-regulate, even though you love co-regulation so much more. Like self-regulation is just not that appealing compared to co-regulation when you could be like, oh, but my partner could be holding me or hugging me or breathing with me, but they need space. So again, this is about being on a team and being like, okay, I love my partner. They're going to come back with more love if I give them the space. You may need, again, working with a coach or a therapist or somebody to help you find some self-regulation tools when the pause happens so that you can actually come back to it and not be resentful that your partner asked for a pause if they were the one that asked. All right, so hope that makes sense. Okay, re-engaging after the pause. So key thing here is speaking from the I. I continue to be astonished how hard this is for some people. Speaking from the I is essential in order to have your partner listen to you. So you have to be a good speaker and then they can be a good listener, right? Narrow the scope, speak about what's actually happening in that moment, in that time, not all the things that happened over the past weeks, months, and years, right? The Gottmans call that kitchen sinking. Don't do that, all right? It's a really bad strategy. Again, you want to have your agreement that your partner won't do it either. Share the impact, not the blame, right? So again, you've probably heard of intent versus impact. You just want to share about the impact. When you did that thing, I felt X, or I made up the story that X, but you're not saying you were a bad person. And then again, this one's really important that the Gottmans talk about and Terry Real talks about is don't complain, make a positive request for the future that your partner can actually agree to and do something about. And if you can't make a positive request, it's like, then your partner feels like, well, you know, what am I supposed to do with that? If it's just like a complaint, then that can actually have them feel disempowered. So you want to empower your partner to do something to like create a better experience for you and for like the team you're on, right? You're on the same team. So for the listener, you want to be able to listen with an open heart, curiosity, right? It's still all those IFS words, the 8 C's and the 5 P's. Seek to be that way. When you're listening, don't get into trying to micromanage their language, tell them they're not feeling the way they're feeling or that their story's invalid. It's like, it's not about that, right? It's not about being right. It's just about listening and being connected. And they're going to do the same for you, right? So just kind of remember that. Like I'm working hard to like not push back on what they're saying, and they're going to do the same for me. And the more you can do that for each other, the more you'll realize at the end of the day, no one cares about what's right or wrong. You care about feeling good together, you know? This is from the Gottmans here is this gentle startup. So they, as I mentioned, the first 180 seconds of a conversation can change the whole direction of the relationship. So if you can start off with something like this, first of all, you can start off with like, hey, I love you, I care about you, I want to share about something. Is this a good time? And then you could say something like, I feel overwhelmed about the dishes piling up. Can you help me for 15 minutes? Right? Versus you're a lazy jerk and you never help out with the dishes, so I need you to be less lazy, right? That's not really actionable. It's going to just turn into a fight. So I hope that's somewhat obvious. But again, this is a good template for you to use. It may seem like this is an easy one, but again, you can do it even for really hard things, but it just might take a little more time to think about it, journal about it, and practice speaking from the I. Terry Real has 5 winning strategies, which are pretty similar to what I just said. So I'm not going to go through all this. I can send you these slides if you want them. But one question I love from this is the empower each other, where he says, after you've, listened to each other, the one person says, what can I give you to help you give me what I want? Right. So that's a really like powerful teamwork type of question. Like, what can I give you to help you give me what I want? So the person's like, oh, if you gave me like presents for 5 minutes, then I'd be able to give you like the going out to dinner thing or whatever, that you want. So it's like really getting into that mindset. I think it's a great question that when I first read it, I was like, huh, I like that. Also, just the speaking with love and savvy, again, there's 4 steps here in step 2, what you saw or heard, what you made up about it. That's really key is like getting that you're making stuff up. How you feel is just how you feel. You don't have to defend that. And then again, what you'd like to have happen. So it's like, don't complain, make requests. So again, as a listener, getting curious, help me understand you. What matters to you about this? What are you afraid of? What do you need from me? Again, you want to be like their partner in listening, right? So sometimes people are even scared to share their full reality. And so as a healthy partner, you want to help them open up more. This is from Stan Katkin's idea of a couple bubble is just like, again, some priorities that you might seek to be in conversation about, like, again, will help you in conflict to be like, okay, let's do this. Like, our relationship takes priority over individual stuff. We protect each other from each other and from outside things. And, we're having each other's backs. So again, these are commitments. So, all right, so this is the summary, recognize and name it when you're triggered, ask for the pause, self-regulation, self-inquiry, connect and co-regulate, and then you grow together, right, through this journey. It's like a oscillation of connection and self-connection. Just going over what we've learned here. And again, it's really easy to talk about these things and kind of conceptually understand them. It's much harder to practice them. And again, I say this with total humility as somebody who works in this space that I still get triggered. I still say things I regret, and it's humbling, and I think it just points to I'm quicker to repair and quicker to notice and quicker to own my part. But I just think this is the kind of thing, the more we can share this and practice this in the world and let people know that they don't need to tolerate incessant conflict or unhealthy conflict, and that there's other ways. I think it's just going to create a healthier world, because I do believe in the micro and the macro and the as above, so below, and all that stuff. So we have to do our part to walk with love. All right, this is just a bit of a reminder. And here's some simple daily rituals. Again, we want to remember that it's not just about conflict and repair, it's about daily practices that feel good for us. So, and connect us. So morning check-ins, hugging, when you're coming to back together after being apart, and also some appreciation practice daily. These are things that, the Gottmans say and others say, it's like the more you build in practices throughout your days that create more connection, the easier it is to come back to love, to forgiveness, to a healthy relational vibration after conflict, right? If you don't do these things and all you're ever working on is just the pause, like it's going to be harder to come back to love and connection. So yeah, so that's the end of the presentation part of it. We'll have some time for some Q&A if anyone has any questions. But if you or anyone might need a little support in their relationship to create a healthier container for commitment and care. I used to do conscious uncoupling coaching, and now I'm trying to do more conscious coupling coaching because I feel like when you first get together with somebody, when you fall in love, like that's a great time to start learning all these skills and practicing them. Or if you're thinking about getting married or engaged or moving in together or whatever. Or if you're struggling, obviously it's also a time to get support and yeah, and see if you can come to this higher level of coherence in the relationship or lovingly release it, right? Because there's a whole lot of things I haven't spoken about, such as really like assessing your values, your compatibility, your future visions of each other and in your lives. Like those are really important things. But my sense is if you can't navigate conflict well, you won't be able to have those discussions with the depth that is required to really to tune into how viable your future connection is with somebody. So, okay, just some Q&A here. If you're doing these things and your partner won't do them, like obviously you need their agreement to pause, but if they're not open to that, that's probably a sign you need some help. How long does this take before you see changes? Again, it can happen pretty rapidly, but if you have a lot of history in the relationship or in your life of relational wounding and trauma, like it can take some time. It can take months of just really practicing this mindfully and also doing other healing work. If there's really serious issues that are creating conflict, like betrayal, infidelity, addiction, this is obviously not a cure-all for that. It's still helpful, but generally speaking, it's good to seek professional support when there's really intense relational issues. I appreciate you being here. Thanks for showing up and hanging out with me. I hope it was useful, and I hope you can practice the pause with whoever you care about.